Someone buys a brand new car for $35,000. They drive it off the dealership lot, straight home, without a single scratch, without adding a single mile beyond the test drive and the trip back. If they try to sell that exact car the very next day, they'd likely only get somewhere between $28,000 and $30,000 for it. Nothing happened to the car. No damage, no mechanical issue, no extra wear. The car is, in every physically meaningful sense, identical to the one that sat on the lot an hour earlier. And yet several $1,000s of value simply evaporated the moment ownership changed hands. This isn't really about the car at all. It's about what new actually means in a market and how quickly that label stops applying the second a transaction is completed. It's a strange thing to sit with, that the exact same physical object, down to the last bolt and the last mile on the odometer, can be worth meaningfully less simply because a piece of paperwork somewhere now says it belongs to someone new. Car depreciation gets talked about constantly in personal finance content, usually framed as a warning about poor spending choices. By used instead of new, avoid frivolous upgrades, don't finance more car than you need. And that advice isn't wrong. But it usually skips past the actual mechanism causing that immediate value drop, treating it as some vague, unavoidable tax on vehicle ownership rather than something with a specific, identifiable cause. According to data published by automotive valuation firms and organizations like Kelley Blue Book and Edmunds, a new car typically loses somewhere between 9 and 11% of its value the moment it's driven off the lot. And this drop happens almost entirely due to a single structural distinction in how used car markets classify and price vehicles, one that has very little to do with the physical condition of the car itself. This distinction matters well beyond a single purchase because that immediate drop compounds with every subsequent year of ordinary depreciation, meaning the specific timing of that first title transfer often represents the single largest percentage loss a car will experience across its entire ownership lifetime, larger than any individual year of normal wear and mileage that follows it. Let's start with the basic mechanics of how used car pricing actually works, because the market categorizes vehicles in a way most buyers never think about explicitly. The used car market treats new and used as two entirely separate categories with separate pricing logic, not as points on a smooth, continuous condition scale. A car with 0 miles that has never been sold to a private owner sits in the new category, priced based on manufacturer's suggested retail price, available incentives, and dealer markup. The instant that same car is sold and titled to an individual owner, even if they turn around and sell it back an hour later, it becomes classified as used, a completely different market with a completely different pricing structure, one based on comparable sales of other used vehicles rather than manufacturer pricing at all. The technical process works like this. The moment a title transfer occurs, the car exits the new vehicle pricing system entirely and enters the used vehicle pricing system. And those two systems are priced independently of each other, connected only loosely by the general reputation and desirability of the model itself. This is where an invisible mechanism takes over that most car buyers never see explained clearly, one tied specifically to information asymmetry and buyer risk perception. Once a car has had even one previous owner, a buyer in the used market has no perfect way of verifying its actual condition, driving history, or how it was treated, even if, in this specific case, the car is functionally brand new. Economists refer to this general problem as the lemons problem, a well-documented phenomenon in markets where sellers know more about a product's true condition than buyers do, which causes buyers to systematically discount their offers to account for the risk that any given used item might be a hidden lemon, even when many individual items in that used category are actually in excellent condition. Because buyers can't perfectly distinguish a car that's used but perfect from a car that's used and secretly damaged, the entire used car category gets priced somewhat lower on average to compensate for that uncertainty, and a nearly new used car gets swept into that same discounted pricing pool regardless of its actual individual condition. There's a related invisible mechanism tied to how dealer incentives and financing structures interact with this same title transfer moment. New cars often come bundled with manufacturer incentives, promotional financing rates, and warranty terms specifically tied to being purchased as new by the original owner, value that simply doesn't transfer to a subsequent buyer purchasing the same car used. A car with a 0% promotional financing offer available only to new car buyers effectively has some of its market value tied up in financing terms that vanish the moment it changes hands, meaning part of that initial price gap reflects real, structural value that genuinely was only available to the first buyer under the new car transaction, not merely buyer perception about a used product. Two real-world patterns make this concrete. Automotive industry data has consistently shown that some vehicle categories, particularly luxury sedans and vehicles that received significant manufacturer incentives at the time of sale, depreciate especially sharply in that first year, specifically because the new car transaction price included incentive value that a used buyer isn't willing to pay for, since that incentive was never available to them in the first place. A second pattern shows up in dealer demo or loaner vehicles specifically, cars that were technically titled to the dealership itself and driven a small number of miles for test drives or loaner purposes, then sold as used despite having essentially the same near zero, whereas a brand new vehicle. These cars reliably sell for noticeably less than an identical new model on the lot, purely because of that same title classification, even though many buyers specifically seek these vehicles out. Precisely because the price gap relative to actual condition makes them, in a narrow sense, a genuinely good deal. This challenges the common assumption that a car's price should primarily track its actual physical condition and remaining useful life, the way most people intuitively think about value. In reality, a meaningful share of a car's price at any given moment reflects which market category it currently sits in, new or used, far more than it reflects the car's specific individual history or condition. The friction point isn't that buyers are being irrational or that dealers are engaged in any kind of deception. The used car discount reflects a genuinely rational response to imperfect information about a large population of used vehicles with wildly varying condition. The friction point is that this discount gets applied uniformly across an entire category, which means an individual car that happens to be in exceptional, essentially new condition still gets priced as if it carries the same uncertainty as the average used car in its class. Zoom out, and this same category label matters more than individual condition. Pattern shows up constantly in other markets built around similar classification boundaries. A house that's been lived in for even a single day gets classified and marketed differently than new construction, even if the physical structure and finishes are functionally identical. Electronics sold as open box, despite sometimes being entirely unused and simply returned unopened, get priced at a discount purely because of that classification change, regardless of actual condition. In every one of these markets, a category boundary, crossed instantly and irreversibly the moment a specific transaction occurs, ends up shaping price far more powerfully than any gradual, continuous measure of an item's actual physical state. What makes this pattern easy to miss in daily life is that most people never consciously separate condition from category. When they think about value, the two feel like the same thing right up until a specific product happens to sit right at the boundary between them, at which point the size of the gap becomes impossible to ignore. So the next time a brand new car loses thousands of dollars in value the instant it's purchased, it's worth remembering what that drop actually represents. It isn't a reflection of the car getting physically worse in any meaningful sense. It's the price of crossing a classification boundary that the broader market treats as a permanent, irreversible signal about risk and uncertainty, one applied uniformly to an entire category of vehicles regardless of how any single car within that category actually happens to be doing.